Hello and welcome. Can new media shape the politics of a country as restrictive as Iran? That's the question being put to the test right now, as continuing protests in Tehran have been making headlines in spite of the government's hard crackdown. With mainstream international and domestic journalists severely restricted from doing their jobs, the majority of video and written dispatches have been coming from citizens, many armed with just a simple mobile phone camera. It defies the efforts of the authorities in Iran, who are well known for erecting one of the world's toughest internet blockades. Blogs, politically unacceptable keywords, and websites like Facebook, MySpace, Flickr and YouTube are blocked, along with many key global broadcasters' websites. But the flow of stories from the streets has not stopped, with people communicating by mobile phones, emails, texts and web chats, among other things. And one particularly disturbing piece of footage that began circulating this weekend, the so-called Neda video, is of a young woman in her 20s who was allegedly shot in the chest. Neda has become a symbol of Iran's escalating crisis, from a political confrontation to far more ominous physical clashes. Protesters took to the streets in Tehran again on Monday, with witnesses describing riot police response that included tear gas and live ammunition fired into the air to disperse the crowds in the center of the city. Iran says at least 17 protesters have been killed in the week of unrest so far, following the June the 12th election result where Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the winner. The country's highest electoral authority, the Guardian Council, has now acknowledged that there had been voting irregularities in 50 electoral districts, but insisted such irregularities did not affect the outcome of the vote. So on today's show, we examine how events continue to unfold and ask, how has technology affected post-election Iran? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room and take part. And of course, we also welcome your phone calls on the show. To discuss the situation of post-election Iran and the role of technology, I'm joined by Ethan Zuckerman, Research Fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. He's co-founder of Global Voices, a non-profit organization that highlights grassroots citizens' media around the world, as well as co-founder of GeekCorps, a non-profit group that provides internet tech training to people in the developing world. Mr. Zuckerman joins us from Amsterdam. From Los Angeles, we have Soraya Sepapor-Ulrich, an independent political essayist and Iranian writer. With me here in Washington, D.C. is Dochi Fasihian from the National Iranian American Council. She serves as Executive Director of the Democracy Coalition Project, where she implements multilateral human rights strategies through the United Nations and other international forums. We welcome you all to the program. And Ethan, if I could start with you there in Amsterdam, good to have you on the show, and ask, is this really the first Twitter revolution, as many are calling it?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's fair to call it a Twitter revolution. There's a real danger that if we think of it as a Twitter revolution, we disrespect the people who are taking an enormous risk out on the ground, going out into the streets, and making their feelings heard. Twitter has been enormously important, as have other social media, in letting the rest of the world know what's going on and letting people feel a sense of solidarity, a sense of involvement with these events. But certainly it's not Twitter or other social media that are bringing people out into the streets. What's going on is a major social movement. We're getting little snippets of it via social media, and I think we're sort of holding on to them for dear life because we're not getting much information from mainstream media because of the crackdown on the press in Iran at the moment.
But Ethan, historically, has there been anything equivalent to this that you can recall that's had this kind of political influence or created this kind of environment in a country?
There have been other cases where social media has become very, very important in protest movement. Just a couple of months ago, we saw the situation in Moldova where protesters went out into the main streets of Chisinau. They used social media to promote what they were doing. And similar to what's going on in Iran, it helped share the events with the rest of the world. It helped people feel like they were involved with it. However, those events in Moldova ended quite quickly. What's going on in Iran is taking a much longer time, and it really seems to point to a much more devoted following on the ground. It's also important to remember that Iran has an enormous population of bloggers, people who've been writing online since as early as 2003, 2004. So there's a huge group of people who know how to use social media of different sorts to get their message out. This is sort of a latent network that when political events happen on the ground in Tehran and other cities, have a sense for how to get around the censorship, how to get these ideas out, and in many cases, how to influence international political opinion. So that does lead this to be a pretty unusual situation.
Well, let's bring in Soraya Sepapor Ulrich in Los Angeles here who's with us. I'm just wondering if you can give us some perspective on essentially how free in the past have people in Iran been to use new media, at least how have they been able to get around it, how effectively have they been able to get around it, and to what degree have they really shown the power of being able to get around it in spite of the authorities' efforts to clamp down?
It's a very interesting question you pose, because when you speak about the media and the people who are using the media to their benefit, it's really the people who have access to technology. And the Iranian government is really doing itself a disfavor by clamping down on the news media, although the news media has always not, well, it has never in fact promoted the government. And by blocking out all the news, it's now put itself at the mercy of those who do send out these video messages. And they are ghastly, and I have all the compassion for the Neda video you speak of and the protesters on the street. But I cannot look the other way to the millions of voices who have voted for Mr. Ahmadinejad. And these people, for the most part, do not have access to internet, to computers, personal computers, and to cell phones. So to say that this is a revolution of the Twitter, as our friend in Amsterdam correctly said, it's very incorrect, it's inaccurate. And Mr. Ahmadinejad's followers cannot make their voices heard because everything is being drummed out by the people who do have access to technology. So
what you're saying is that the picture is quite distorted. The fact we're seeing so many people on the streets, it's because of the profile of the people on the streets that we're seeing that it's largely opposition, that perhaps if the people who supported Mr. Ahmadinejad had the access, there might be a different kind of scene?
For the most part, yes. Now, I'm not implying that everybody who supports Mr. Mousavi is rich and everybody who supports Mr. Ahmadinejad is poor. But for the most part, that is the case. And we are basically ignoring a very large population of Iran who does not have access to these social networks. And I'm sure that even if they did have access and sent little Twitter messages to the State Department, which Mr. Obama's asked to stay open and not go down, to say that we do support Mr. Ahmadinejad, that we would be seeing them here.
Okay, Dr. Fasihian, I wonder, I know the profile has changed, though, the people on the streets, hasn't it? So based on what Soraya Sepapor Ulrich is saying, is how distorted a picture are we getting in the West if it's only people who support the opposition who have access to the media?
Well, I would respectfully disagree with Ms. Ulrich on this issue. There's no indication or evidence to show that supporters of Mr. Ahmadinejad have no access to the internet.
Although many of them are rural poor, though. Yeah?
Well, I mean, there might be, of course, he does have supporters among the rural poor, but I'm sure he has supporters in the urban areas as well. I mean, I think what's important to recognize is that, you know, this election and the process that we saw, there were 4 candidates, and Iranians were following these candidates' positions in the debates during the election process very, very carefully. And there are supporters on every side, and I just don't think it's easy to be able to profile who those supporters are. So I would reject that that some would have access to the internet while others would not.
Could I put you an email that we got from Bangkok in Thailand? It came in from a viewer by the name of Jan C, who writes in saying, the readiness by Western media and politicians to accept criticism spread by Twitter against the Iranian government as facts is absolutely ridiculous. Such journalism can only backfire. Let's say that the election was rigged by the right wing. Would they really have been able to rig it on such a grand scale? The West has to accept Iran as it is. Enough lies have been spread already. So someone here who believes that the election stands.
I think we need to focus on the human rights violations right now taking place against Iranians and the lack of an access to freedom of information. Whether or not it was rigged by the right or the left, right now what we're seeing is a complete media blackout and a clampdown on Iranians that have been trying to peacefully protest. These protests started peacefully. We saw millions upon millions of people pour into the street 9 days after the elections. And Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei came and said in his Friday prayer that he would that he would clamp down, and he warned that they would use all means necessary to clamp down against protesters. And this was a warning that goes against human rights any standards of human rights. I mean, there have been major human rights violations taking place, and I think that's where the focus should be right now.
The fact that they've gone on so long is a big factor, though, isn't it? In Iran, this is quite unusual.
It is unusual. I mean, we have not seen this much unrest since the revolution. In fact, I mean, there was an uprising in 1999, mainly among Iranian students, that was put down brutally. But this has gone way beyond that, and we're seeing not just Iranian students, we're seeing old, young, men, women of all backgrounds, of all classes coming out and saying, we want more democracy, not less democracy. And they strongly believe that there has been major fraud in this election.
We're going to ask you all to stand by for a pause as we stop for a break now here. As we pause, let me remind you that you can join the conversation that we're having with your questions and comments by logging on to livestation.com and entering the chat room. We've also got a poll in our chat room where we're asking, can the authorities in Iran truly block the influence of new media? Let us know what you think. We'll be back after this short break.